So when I'm setting up and making my batik, the very first thing that I have to do is take my thumbnail sketch and transfer it over to my cloth. I've cut a cloth that fits my frame that I'll use from there, and then I'm very lightly gonna mark out in pencil what my drawing will be. This way I can roughly see it, but if I do my pencil too dark, then you'll actually start to see it on and coming through on my final piece, which I don't want. So I'm just gonna roughly do where I'm thinking. Okay. The next thing I gotta think about too is what area do I wanna keep white? Anything that I need to stay white the whole time is gonna be the first thing that I wax. Okay, so as I do this, and I might not follow my sketch roughly, but I need to know some areas that I wanna block out, okay? Now my sketch here, I decided I wanted to do this flower sketch with some dots around it. Overall, I'm not gonna have a lot of white in mind, but I do wanna make sure that I know roughly where I have to start and execute each of these things. So as I go, I just make sure that I have my rough outline of my design put in place. If you have a lot of detail, you're really gonna wanna make sure that you block out and that you think through what order you have to apply your color first. You're gonna work lighter to darker, and you're gonna work white to dark, okay? The very first thing I would do is block that out. I did, after looking at my sketch, that really, I don't want there to be any white on my design. So I therefore get to go straight to dyeing. If I decided I wanted white outlines on any of my flowers, I would actually go and I would wax first, okay? But since I don't, I'm gonna go right into dyeing. Now I'm gonna make my analogous color scheme, and there's a few things I have to do to get my dye set up. First off, when I'm working with these big dye containers, I make sure that I have these lovely disposable gloves on, along with an apron, so that I don't get dye all over me. This is fabric dye, so it will be a permanent change to your clothes if you do it. I also find a palette, and then I find my pipettes. Now, once I have my baseline of dye done, that's when I get it set up to wax the first time. I need to make sure I have a frame for it, and then I need to make sure I have enough of these push pins to actually secure it around the frame. The best way to do this is to go opposite corners first, just like you would making a bed, okay? And make sure we pull it nice and taut all around, okay? My final piece is going to be more inside of here, so that's why I'm okay with the fact that I have some of this dye not reaching all the way around. There's the camera. Okay, but I really want to make sure that these push pins are nice and taut. If I don't have this on a wood frame, I've had some kids in the past try and do it without the frame. The problem is then the wax bleeds through and it actually sticks to the paper underneath. Speaking of the paper underneath, you need to make sure anytime you are dyeing or waxing with batiks that we use a lot of this paper. That's how we keep it somewhat nice and clean and from ruining tables here. Now I'm ready to wax. Anything that I wax at this point will permanently stay this color the entire way of this piece, okay? Once I wax it in, I cannot remove it. So whatever I'm gonna commit to with this, I need to make sure that it's what I want. Now, when I'm ready to wax, I have different tools that I can use to apply the wax. These are called janting tools, okay? And I have about 3 different ones of these. Now, they work different ways. You're always gonna make sure that these are not just laying inside the wax. They'll get very hot for the next person to use, but when I'm ready to use them, each pot will only have one of these. Oh, see, look at that. That's why we don't leave them in there. Man down. Okay, this wax is about 280 degrees, so we do want to make sure we don't touch too much of that. Okay, but all I have to do to get the wax softened up on the end is just let it sit in there for a couple minutes. Okay, then the janting tool, the way that this works is that the wax goes inside this little cup and comes out through this tiny needle point exit there. you'll notice that some of these janting tools allow the wax to come out at different points. What I always do is I have my scrap piece of canvas. This is the same one I tested my dies on, but now I can use this one to test my janting tools as well. So the way I always practice with my janting tool is to actually take my cloth, bring the janting tool over and see, can I get this tool to have the control that I need it to for my design? This one works well. It comes out slow enough that I can get straight lines, but also, or fast enough I can, but also slow enough that I can do my dots, okay? At a certain point, again, you have to remember that with batiks, it's also about that process too. So if I'm like, I need it to be perfect, okay? This one comes out pretty fast, but in big globs, so I can't necessarily do as much of the writing, all right? And then this one here, I think this one is one of my really fast ones. So if I get it to soften up, yep. So this one comes out really fast on here. So if I'm doing a lot of quick lines, I probably don't want to use that one because I'm not going to have as much control. If I want more abstract, maybe I will, okay? So now I'm going to start to use this janting tool, and I'm going to use this to lock in the blue that I want, okay? When I do this, I'm not going to go right from my wax all the way onto my project. I'm going to get dropped somewhere on there, and then you'll be kind of bummed, okay? So I'm going to take my cloth, and then I'm going to start going by this, okay? Now this is the way that I'm going to work. Again, you have to remember that there's a little bit of flexibility within this. So even already, like, all right, let's see where this goes. Okay, can pull up from there. Now see, at a certain point, if stuff like that happens, that's where I roll with it. Maybe I work that into my design later on. Or maybe I decide that that one's gonna be a little bit more dimensional. Okay, when I need more wax, that's when I'll go back and get it. And I'm gonna decide to actually loosen up all these lines. Because of that, I'm gonna pull a little Bob Ross, turn it into a happy accident there. And I'm gonna make that actually my style for this whole flower. Okay, so now I'm gonna loosen up those lines a little bit more. They don't have to be perfect contour lines. Oh, Bob Ross would be so proud. Okay, so now I've kind of got this cool abstract flower rolling with me here. Now I'm gonna do my other flower in the other corner. Maybe that one, I might do the same thing, might keep it a little bit different. Let's see how this goes. This first portion of my wax done. So everything I've just waxed here is going to stay that nice blue. Now, for the sake of this, and in order to go fast, I'm gonna just dye right on top of here. This is the point that if another classmate is waiting for the wax, you would actually unpin it and take it back to go do your next layer of dye. However, because I'm my only classmate right now, I don't have to wait, all right? Now, what I've decided is that I want the outline to be this bright blue, and the actual flower is gonna be a cool minty green, all right? Once the wax is dry, which is actually very quickly, I can go right on and add my next layer of dye. I don't have to wait for it to dry because it's almost instantaneous, okay? So now I take a different brush than the one I was using before, and I make sure what dye it is that I'm using for this one, okay? And then I can go and I can fill in. And the nice part is I don't have to worry about where my lines are, because the wax actually navigates where it falls into, which is pretty cool. Okay, now I can make the choice whether or not I want to go into there, but I might actually wait and let that purple play with that later on. If I simply want to layer up and create different hues of even just with this teal here, even if it's not totally dry yet, now's a good time where I can actually do that. So say I just want to go and make this a little bit darker. This is almost dry, but now's a really good time for me to go and turn that to a darker shade. Okay, so again, sometimes this is the back and forth thing. Well, what I was doing while I'm waiting for this to dry is actually working on my thumbnails for my bigger project, okay? So that's something you can always think about too. Maybe I just want to do some slight blend of this, okay, and kind of let it run wherever it pleases. I left that already a little darker, you can tell. So my goal when I'm trying to do this dye, an important thing to remember is that I'm not trying to oversaturate everything. If so, then it'll be drying for a while, and you run the risk of, if it's on the drying rack, you actually run the risk of your dye dripping onto other people's projects. So we don't want to do that, but I do want to get it so that it's definitely absorbed into it and working a little bit more there, okay? If I get too much dye on something, I can actually take my scrap piece again and I can use it to kind of pick it up and absorb some of that if I don't like the way that is. But now that I've got that dye set, I'm just gonna let it sit, and then I'll come back and I'll wax things in again. So what I did end up doing with this was filling in the center of the flower, simply because had I wanted it to stay this blue, I really should have waxed that in all the way. And when I was doing this one, the dye started to creep over to it because I wasn't paying attention, and so I thought, well, we'll go with that there. Now is the point though where I have to wait for this dye to dry, and again, if I use a hairdryer now, I'm actually gonna remelt some of this wax, so I won't do that. Now is a great time if you ever have to do this, to work on your sketchbook entry for the week. Maybe use a couple minutes for a study hall, but at this point, all you need is just a few minutes for it to dry before it's ready for your next round. Now this is a good time for me to reassess what my original design is, what I want to work with, and I can really figure out what do I want to do with this background. I could easily just add another coat of dye to this, and had I wanted to do just that, I could have done that earlier in this process. But if I want to add any other design or think about how I could make this look a little unique and different and maybe more playful, or more pattern-like, now's a good time for me to come back and do that as well. So what I decided is I do just want to mark around here with some little dots. So again, I'm preserving this bright blue, because what I think I'm going to do is actually apply more of a purple wash to this whole thing and then actually put a crackle over it all. So now I'm going to take my janting tool again, heat it back up. Okay, and then I'm going to come through, and this is where I'm just going to add my dots. So now once I have these dots complete here too, now this is where I can add some other backgrounds as well with this, but you know, because I'm having fun with this here, this is where I might decide, oh, maybe some flowers need a leaf. Now that I have that done, then I can add my last layer of dye to this as well. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a purple. And then after the purple, I'm gonna seal the whole thing and apply what's called the crackle look to it as well. So I'm gonna first make sure if my wax is any bit tacky, that means it's still cooling. When the wax is fully cool, it'll actually, or fully dry, it'll feel cool. But as long as it doesn't feel tacky, I can go ahead and apply my dye over it. Okay, now here I'm gonna kind of keep in mind that I don't wanna go too far over it. So this purple is gonna look different because I have the blue underneath than if I just did the straight purple. So again, that's where when you think about how you painted your color wheel with the watercolors, think about how this is gonna interact and overlap. Along with this too, it's gonna be kind of more of a bright, vibrant purple to it because of that blue undertone. Whereas if I just did the straight purple, it'd have more of that violet coming through. So then I go in and I fill in here. Now if I really wanted to, if I was really particular about how I wanted these flowers to be kept up, I like to live in the land of risk just a little bit, but if I felt really anxious about the fact that I did not want any of this purple to touch the flowers, what I could actually do then is wax over the entire flower. That way, if any purple tries to seep or go anywhere it shouldn't, I've got wax there as a resist to control where it would or wouldn't go. Now on this one, because I already just have a looser style to this whole thing, it's not gonna bother me if I have some of the purple bleed slightly into the flower. Ideally, I'm careful enough when I apply this that I don't. But if it were to happen, it's not gonna be the end of my world. If you have a design, like I said though, that you really do wanna protect it and guard it, then probably wax over that before you start to dye it, just to preserve that a little bit more, okay? Now, as I finish this in, I'm gonna do a check. That way I don't forget anything. I've had students in the past forget an area, and once you kind of do that, there's no going back. So take the time to double check, make sure you hit all the areas that you would like. And then you're gonna wait for this one to dry as well. Now this is at the final point where I think the last thing that I'm going to do is apply my crackle over this. So now is where I take the time to really make sure, is there any other shade of color I wanna add in? Is there anything differently I wanna do? I mean, I could build up and layer this as many times as I would like to try and get different shades. A lot of times some of the original types of batiks, they actually get to the point where their whole thing is covered then with wax and color just because of how much they built up their colors. For example, I could choose to then go and create a ring around this, each of these leaves. That would actually look really cool. And then I could go over it with this purple again, so that way I'd have the blue ring and then I'd have like this slight dark purple coming around it too. So this is the point where I can look at some of that and think, is there anything else I want to add to this? Anything that I want to beef it up with a little bit more? For now, I'm going to call this good. I'm going to wait for it to dry, and then I'm going to come back and do the crackle effect over it all. Okay, so I'm at the point where now if I want to do the crackle, I can apply the wax over the entire thing. If I decide that I don't like the crackle look on things, this would be the point that I'd take it off and I'd actually go and remove the wax anyways. But because I want to show you what that crackle looks like, we'll go ahead and do that. So same thing as before, anytime I'm using wax tools, I want to soften them up just a little bit first. So I'll let this brush kind of sit in the wax for a moment while I make sure that I'm ready to go. When I apply this final wax layer for the crackling, what I want to make sure is that I don't go super thick on it. I've had students in the past go too thick or build up too many times, and what happens is then it breaks away in chunks, and then when you do your final round of dye, you just end up with pools of it. So I want to make sure that I do a consistent, even layer, but I also want to make sure that I'm not going too thick on things here, okay? Now that this brush is ready, I can work pretty quickly and I can cover the whole thing. If, say, I did not want the crackle on the flowers, then I just don't wax over that, and when I'm painting in that dye, I would not do that as well. Because when I do the crackle, I have really no control over what cracks and what doesn't. The only thing that controls it is where the wax is. So if I let the wax go on the flower and I don't want it there, that causes a problem as well. So again. Now that I've decided I have wax everywhere I need it to go, I'm gonna wait for it to cool. While it's cooling, this is where I'm gonna get my dye set up to do my final crackle look. With this, I could either choose to take purple, I could choose to take a black. That's a very traditional way of doing the crackle, is that you finish with a black on top. But what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just aim for a dark purple, and so I'm gonna mix my dyes. All right, now I have my crackles. I have my dye ready to go. So again, if I'm unsure of what color that is, I usually just take my test strip here, see what color exactly that is that I mixed. You can mix your dyes outside of it, that's fine too, okay? I might actually wanna do a little bit more black or a little bit darker of a violet to make that come to life. So I can just use my pipette and then I use my paintbrush to mix it around. Okay, again, please don't put pipettes in different areas. All right, now I feel like I like the purple that I have. My wax is cooled, okay? So now I'm actually gonna take it off of here. Now, I need to remove it in order to do the crackle. I just won't get the full effect otherwise. So the crackle is kind of fun. If you're having a rough kind of day, it takes out some aggression, mainly just because you get it scrunched up really well. So as I peel it off, cool. And I'm actually excited to see if I can get some of the crackle to go around here. The only downside is that I really need to watch that I don't get dye in there. But now that I'm ready to do the crackle, I just scrunch. And I take the areas where where the wax is, and I just scrunch it all up, like that, and I'm actually breaking apart the wax, okay? So you can see as I look there that that's where then the wax will go in. I can even scrunch it a little bit more, maybe leave it for a sec, but I'm trying to break up where exactly that wax is, so that way the dye can kind of find its way through. Now, if you want less crackle, obviously you're not gonna scrunch as many different times. If you really want fine cracks, ooh, that's gonna be cool. then you can go there. Now, one thing to know, this is where I get nervous because of how much those cracks are. I might have built up my wax a little too much there. So anytime you have chunks breaking off like that, you have to know that that's where your die has potential to sit a lot more. And then you lose some of that crackle effect and end up with it just pooling. So I'm gonna be paying attention to that as I apply this last die. And actually, I don't need to repin it because I'm just doing the last round of dye, okay? All right, so now I'm gonna smooth it back out, and this is the moment we see where all this crackle went, okay? This is the corner I'm nervous about, so cross your fingers, all right? So then if I take my dye, this time it's actually gonna sit more on top because of the wax, and hopefully I broke it up enough. I'm hoping that it absorbs in there. That crackle, that's kind of my last final step in seeing if this did everything that I wanted it to. Okay, now if I have a lot of dye just sitting on top of here, this is the time where I could actually take like a paper towel and just blot it up ever so gently, so that way I'm not spreading it more. Okay, and I can let it be from there. Now is the fun part where we're gonna let this dry, and then I'm actually gonna go and start removing the wax in a very tedious kind of process. After I've completed my batik and all my dye has dried up again, then what I do is I move to the process of removing the wax. I grab an entire roll of this blueprint, and then I also grab an iron and I make sure that this is nice and heated up. Now what I have to do is I'm going to sandwich my batik between these pages actually, and then I'm going to iron it, and you'll actually see where the wax pulls up from here, and I'm going to keep doing this until I can't see it anymore. So now I'll start, and right away you can see how the wax grabs on to the paper. If I keep ironing over and over this, the paper can't grab any more wax at a certain point. But I'm gonna try and first do one layer, find out where all that wax really is. You'll notice the areas, obviously, where you waxed over it all, like where I did the crackle. That's where I have a lot more wax coming through on this paper. Okay, so now I'm kind of maxed probably for what this paper can absorb. So I peel this layer up, it to the back. If I have a lot of wax like this that's actually gone onto the layer underneath, I'll pull both up. And this is where we just go through a lot of it. If you can, it's always nice if I can just slide this further back. For the sake of keeping this in one area for you, I won't, but a lot of times I'll put it there, slide it over here, then move it back. So as much as we can utilize that, that really helps out. Now I can use this.
Yeah, so feel.
See how we're doing? Feel some wax there, but that's not on part of it. Feeling pretty good. Can move it fairly well. Yeah, I don't feel any wax buildup. So now this means that I'm ready to actually take and mount it. So now that I have my finished piece, again, I can check, do one last wax check. I feel that it's stiff. Obviously, I've changed the characteristics of the fabric, so that's fine. Then I'm gonna go find a piece of scrap mat board, not my nice stuff, but a piece of scrap in the back bin, or find a piece of chipboard. And I'm gonna cut it to be roughly the size, slightly smaller than what it is, because when I fold and fully finish presenting this, I wanna make sure that I don't see any of those rough edges come around. And then I'm gonna pull it tight all the way around and tape. So I'm gonna make sure I got it roughly where I wanted. Then I flip, and then I'll tape each of these pieces down. Once I'm ready, simply pull some big stretches of tape, fold, and I first just do one piece to secure it, and then I'll go all the way around actually and get all of this. So I'm gonna make sure, might need to switch it. Again, take the time, do this right. Okay, so now I'm gonna try this so I can get that corner. There we go. Voila. First do all the sides, and then I can fold in my corners as well. You can do a quick check before I seal. Yep, looking like I'm on task. Then to do the corners, all that I simply do is I press in, kind of like some of you might make a bed. So I first take my corner, press it in, and then I fold this on top, okay? Then once I have that corner, then I'm actually gonna go through and seal the entire thing with a long piece. And boom, now I have my finished batik. Ta-da!